Alana, I do not see 3 dots in the right-hand corner of video so that I can check my name.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. If you try going to, it may be the view that you're in. So if you try going to the participant list instead, and if anyone else is having this, this can be directions for everyone. If you go to the participant list and go to your name, you should be able to click like additional options and see rename.
Well, this is Randy. My name is up there. My name is long. I'm just going to leave it as it is. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine. That was just a way to make it easier so everyone can see the organizations that people are from.
Right. See if I can fit something in.
And you can do your last name initial if that makes it easier as well.
This is Wilma. I just have my name up there, Wilma. Is that okay? You know, do I need to have Aberdeen Town?
Nope, that's totally fine.
Okay.
So I think we've still got some people joining, but I think we are going to get started just so that we can use our time effectively. So thank you, everyone. If you can see the instructions on the screen, this is not a requirement, but it's an opportunity to just make it easier for everyone who is participating to see what organizations everyone is from. Because we do have a really large number of different local governments and nonprofit partners who are part of this conversation today. So not a requirement, but if you want to rename yourself, that would be great. So good morning, everyone. We're really excited to have you all here. This is the 4th annual regional summit. Some of you have been to past years. This is obviously a very different format than before, but we are adjusting as needed. My name is Elena Keegan. I'm on staff at Triangle J. And I have the honor of doing introductions, but really more importantly, some housekeeping items. So everyone has probably been on a Zoom call before, but if you have not been, just a couple of things to note. We are recording today's meeting, so be aware of that. Unless you are speaking, please mute, and you have come into the meeting muted, so just also note that if you do need to speak, you'll need to unmute. Any questions and comments that you have, please feel free to utilize the chat box. We will be monitoring that. We want this to be interactive. Our workshop leader today, Sharon, will be happy to engage as we can with time. If you need captions, we do have that available as well. That will be in your taskbar that's either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your view. You can choose to turn on captions. So there's a closed caption option. I will make a note that it is not 100% accurate captions. It's probably 80 to 85% accurate, but it will give you a general understanding of what's going on if you're having any challenges hearing. And then just a TJCOG tip, if you're having bandwidth issues and you're having trouble hearing, it might help to join through audio on your phone. That information was emailed out previously. So that's just if things are not working with your computer, that will help. So those are the housekeeping items. I am now going to turn over to Sarah Coates, who's from Local Government Federal Credit Union, who is our sponsor for today's session, just to give a few remarks. Sarah?
Thank you, Elena. Good morning, y'all. We are so excited to be a sponsor again. This is our 4th year sponsoring the TJ Cog Summit, and we're really excited that we can meet, whether it be virtual or not. And we're just really honored to be a part of this. I want to give you a little bit of background about Lgfcu. So the local government federal credit union is a member-owned, not-for-profit financial cooperative. We are the only statewide credit union exclusively serving municipal and county employees, elected and appointed officials, volunteers, and their families. Our mission is to improve the lives of our members, and we really take pride in doing that. Our mission reflects the philosophy of our board of directors, which is comprised of volunteers elected by credit union membership. So all of our board of directors are volunteers. As I stated before, memberships are available to all local government employees, volunteers, and their families in NC, and which obviously means absolutely the Council of Government Employees and your volunteers and family members. Local government federal credit union, our primary purpose is to provide affordable financial services to members. Benefits are provided to our members in lower loan rates, higher interest rates on deposits, and nominal fee structure. We offer a variety of deposit and lending accounts. Those include auto, home, and personal loans, individual retirement accounts, credit cards, estate planning, free financial advisory services, collegiate scholarships, and much, much more. We offer several convenient tools to help manage your finances. We have the Compass, which is a digital tool, digital budgeting tool. We have budgeting calculators, online banking, and telephone access to accounts. We also have many other services and features that make it helpful to you guys. We offer Member Connect, so you can pay your bills on your own schedule, and you can even set up text alerts to stay on top of your balance. Lgfcu and the State Employees Credit Union developed a cohesive shared branch network, which allows all of our Lgfcu members to access all 150 branches and over 1,100 ATMs throughout North Carolina. Every member at the credit union gets a vote, which is why we have been voted #1 by Forbes magazine as the best credit union in 2018 and 2019. We're really proud of that. And I will send my email address in the chat box, and so you guys can reach out to me. I also encourage you to check out our website to learn more, and we look forward to serving you guys, and we're excited about this summit. Thanks, Elena.
Thank you, Sarah. So I will now turn it over to 2 of our TJ Cog board members. First, our chair, Don Raines, and following him will be Deidreana Freeman.
Welcome. This is the 4th annual summit. The first 2 summits were in Clayton, Pittsburgh, and then the last one was in, Sanford, and the last one was in Pittsburgh. Today is virtual. It's raining outside, so enjoy your comfort in home, and it's going to be a excellent conference, and we look forward to having you with us today. TJ Cog Triangle J region is pleased to provide leadership in planning for our members and beyond. This summit provides timely and meaningful topics that affect our communities, equity, and local government. I'm pleased to introduce Sharon Williams. She comes from a rich background in this topic, and she is with the City of Durham since October 2015, and she is in the HR department. She has worked on implementing the City of Durham's annual All-Employee Leadership Conference and instrumental in making the business case of racial equity to senior leaders. On July 1st, 2019, Sharon assumed the role as the City of Durham's first racial equity manager. Her first assignment was to form the city's first racial equity core team. The team is made up of responsibility for the 19 of the city's 24 departments and is responsible for normalizing, organizing, and operationalizing racial equity in the City of Durham. Accomplishments include the development of vision, mission, and language that will give racial equity work. The team has also launched the City of Durham's first Racial Equity Survey, which will provide meaningful insights that will be integrated into the city's first racial equity action plan. Sharon is passionate about her work and the ability to have meaningful impact on employees and residents of the City of Durham for advancing equity. And I know she's going to be giving us a timely topic for us to work on our goals. And I will turn it over to Deandra Freeman, which is our Secretary Treasurer for Triangle J and the delegate for the City of Durham.
Hello, everyone. I'm Deandra Freeman, and I am excited as a council member in the City of Durham to have Sharon sharing some of the work she's been doing in Durham. Just acknowledging that her work as a Chief Equity Manager on staff supports the work of equity that we've been trying to address in the community and internally. Looking at policies and procedures in departments is hugely a part of this equity work. And so just acknowledging that race and race equity factor into this conversation in ways that show or demonstrate how systems, institutions, and policies have impact. And so acknowledging that this equity work and then in addressing inclusion, that looking at race equity as a tool has been beneficial in developing the Race Equity Task Force. And I know Sharon's been very helpful and supporting their work as well in the community. And also just noting that the work that she does with the Government Alliance for Race Equity and coordinating or collaborating across cities and towns across the state has also been beneficial. And so I encourage you all to take good notes and ask a lot of questions. I think she'll be a very valuable resource. And no one else can take her from Durham, just so clear. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to turn it over to you, Sharon. So if I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can start.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be with you this morning. Thank you, Don and Councilwoman Freeman and Elena for the introduction and for your support. I am delighted to be with you this morning, despite the rain. It's raining all over North Carolina, but we can get through this. And I'm happy to see that TJCOG has pivoted. I know that this is different for all of us to have a conference and the whole conference is going to be online, but I'm happy to see that that pivot has already started as it has from many organizations. I'm going to be talking to you today about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's racial equity. I am part of the Equity and Inclusion Department for the City of Durham. So I started in HR in 2015, and in 2019, I moved to the Equity and Inclusion Department, which was formerly Equal Opportunity and Equity Assurance. That department deals with contracting equity and now racial equity. So today I'm going to be talking about and sharing some information around racial equity. I am by no means an expert. I think we all, and there are many jurisdictions in North Carolina now that are looking at racial equity, are on this path to learning and understanding together, but it is something that we feel passionate about, and I'm happy to be part of that journey. All right, so let's start with a question for you, and I'd really like to encourage you to use the chat. So everybody should see a chat button, and locate that chat button, and I'd like your to this motivation for attending today's session. So please take a moment to drop something into chat. And Elena, can you give me an idea of what you're seeing once they start coming up?
Everyone's thinking.
All right, we're going to be using that chat a lot today. So this is just the beginning of finding it and putting something in chat. So hopefully you'll drop something in there that we can see and share with others.
So we're hearing to learn how to apply because it's one of the top issues of today, professional education and personal reflection, to better inform my work. Discovering pathways of racial inequity that are unconscious in government routines. Our town has named it a priority.
So that's excellent. Thank you for those of you that did respond. And I see a few more that are coming in. We are going to be using that chat a lot today, a lot. So I'm glad that you've oriented yourself to it, and hopefully you'll continue to use that as we go through this session. Let's talk about the agenda for today. We're going to talk about why racial equity. So there are a lot of cities that are adopting a racial equity agenda or moving forward with things that are related to racial equity. And the question is why? Why racial equity and why now? We're also going to talk about racial equity as a strategic priority, which is what it is for the city of Durham and many other jurisdictions. We're going to talk about adopting a model and taking inventory, building a racial equity plan, and adopting and applying a racial equity tool. So that's pretty much what we want to review today. Here's what I would ask of you. Stay tuned, be here. This is only an hour-and-a-half session, so be here, be interactive with us. Take space and make space and do it respectfully. We may not all agree on the problem or the solution, but we have a perspective, and please put that forward. Use I statements when you can, whether it's in the chat or you unmute and you say something. We all have different lived experiences. Offer what you can and ask for what you need. So let your voice be heard. If there's something you don't understand, say that. And if I can't provide it, perhaps there's somebody else that's part of this conversation that can. Finally, expect and accept a lack of closure. We're all learning as we go. That includes us. We started our journey in 2017, I believe it is, but we're still learning and we're still on that road to learning and growing together. So there will be a lack of closure because that growth continues. Let's start with government and equity. We're going to talk about racial equity then and now, inequity drivers, and the goal of racial equity work. First, let's do a poll. And so if you haven't done a poll before, this is something that's going to pop up on your screen. And here's the poll question. Government, local, state, and federal have played a role in creating and maintaining historical inequities. The poll that'll come up on your screen will say, do you agree? Are you unsure? Great participation. Keep it coming. We're at 70%. All right, 10 more seconds and we're going to close the poll. All right, here is what you said. Looks like 95% of you agreed, 2% disagreed, and 3% said they're unsure. So excellent representation. Would you stop sharing results, please? So let's go through this together and let's talk about government and our role. Elena, you can stop the poll. Okay. Well, for some reason, it didn't want to let me advance. So technology can fail you. So Give me a minute. Let me figure out why, and we'll be right back to the presentation. All right. So Elena, there's a failure on my end. I'm not sure why. It's not responding to me at all.
That's fine. I can pull up your PowerPoint if you want me to move through the slides.
Okay. You may have to unless I figure this out.
Not a problem.
And that's why with technology, you have multiple backups. All right, I don't know if this is you or me, but this is the slide that I want to go to. And so the question was about a historical perspective on racial inequity. And it said government has played a role in creating and maintaining racial inequity. So let's talk about some of the things that government has been involved in. One of them was voting laws. And Elena, I think I can see you in my side view.
Do you see the slides now?
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to stop sharing?
I think you're all set actually. So you can just keep going. Yep.
Okay. So you can remove yours because I can also see yours. I just can't see the people anymore. I can't do a side by side, but I'm okay. Okay, got it. So government has played a role in creating and maintaining racial inequities. These are some of the ways. When you think about voting laws or who has property, who owns property, where people live, and who could collect or use benefits, government played a role in all of those things. Let's talk about that role for just a second. So when you go back to voting laws, what are some of the things that were in place that precluded people from voting that government had a role in? And can you please put a response in the chat? And Elena, if you'll let me know what you're seeing.
Yep. You needed to be able to own property, poll taxes, housing laws, redlining, women could not vote,
Yes.
gerrymandering.
You are right on it. I was surprised to know that poll taxes were not repealed in some jurisdictions until 1973. In North Carolina, it was 1920. Virginia, it was 1966. Maine, 1973. And that's just some examples. But those were ways that government collaborated in that. Who owns property and where people live. Government actually, FHA provided money for developers to develop large communities. And in order to get that money to develop the large communities, you had to ban African Americans, so people of color could not live in those communities. And there was a clause that said you also couldn't sell to them. Yes, and it said Native Americans too. And so you'll hear me say people of color, and I include Native Americans in that as well. And so government did play a role in voting laws, who has property, who owns property, where people live, and who could collect and who could use benefits. Next slide, please. So why lead with race? From infant mortality to life expectancy, race, not skill or ability, predicts how well you will do, which is why we lead with race. That's today. So the previous slide was a historical perspective, but when you look at inequity today, race continues to be a predictor of how well you will do. So whether we are talking about education, criminal justice, health, the environment, jobs, housing, it doesn't matter what the discussion is about, race is still a predictor of how well you will do. And so all you need to do is Google the statistics around education in North Carolina, or jobs, or housing, or health in our state to see the disparities that exist. Next slide, please. So what are some of the racial inequity drivers? One is individual racism, and that's bigotry or discrimination by an individual based on race. The second one, institutional racism. That's policies, practices, or procedures that work better for white people than for people of color, often unintentionally or inadvertently. And the third driver, structural racism. This is racism across institutions. It's public policies, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other norms that are working basically in concert, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial inequity. Next, please. So what we're going to be talking about are some of the foundations of equity work. Some of you said early in the chat that you wanted to learn more about equity in case this is a journey that your jurisdiction is on, or it's a journey that your jurisdiction is already on. So we're going to talk about racial equity as a strategic priority. We're going to present a model to guide the work. We're going to talk about a team and how essential that team is in organizing for equity. We're going to talk about a vision and a mission and how important that is to equity work, and that's called normalizing. And can you hit the enter key again? We're going to talk about creating shared understanding. One more bullet, important in normalizing conversations about race, organizational assessment. And then finally, we're going to talk about a tool. One more, please. A plan, operationalizing equity, and one more, equitable decision-making. So we will be ending today talking about a model that you could use for equitable decision-making, regardless of where your jurisdiction is on this journey, and most especially if you're just beginning. So a lot of people will say at this kind of session, is there something I can take away or something that I can take back or that I can do right now? That's something that we're going to be talking about at the end of this session and that we'll be working through together. Next slide, please. So one of the things to do is to establish racial equity as a strategic priority. I would tell you that racial equity is a strategic priority in the city of Durham. I am grateful that Councilwoman Freeman is on the call with us today. So it is a strategic priority, not just for all city leadership, not just internal, but also our elected officials as well, who were very instrumental in starting this journey. Elena, would you click through? And it's 5 clicks. Okay. So establishing racial equity as a strategic priority means learning about racial equity. This is a road that you have to, this is a concept that you have to learn about. So you need to know what racial equity is and what it's about, and then define your why. Why do you want to start looking at racial equity and integrating racial equity into the conversation that you're having in your jurisdiction? Create the business case. So I was instrumental in building the business case for racial equity. That means looking at why and what it could mean for our jurisdiction and why it's important right now that we begin to do this work. So I made that case to the city manager and the senior leadership of our organization. Adopt a racial equity agenda is a formal adoption process where you say, as leadership of the city of Durham, elected officials and members of our senior staff, racial equity is a strategic imperative. This is something that we're going to pay attention to and that we think we can do something about as an organization, and then provide resources and funding. All of those things are key to beginning a racial equity journey. Next slide, please. One of the things that I strongly encourage is adopting a model to guide racial equity work. The model that we use is from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. We call it GARE, G-A-R-E. GARE says you need to normalize, organize, and operationalize for equity. And although there are arrows there, it doesn't necessarily mean you will go in that order. Organizing, if we started there, is about your internal infrastructure and your partnerships. How are you going to be organized to do racial equity work? What is it going to mean where you live? Normalizing is about normalizing conversations about race. It's creating a shared analysis and definitions, and it's creating urgency and making it a priority. Operationalizing is taking racial equity tools and applying them. And it's using data to develop strategies and to drive results. Next slide, please. So one of the things we encourage is organizing. So I thought I'd show you what a diverse team looks like. This is the City of Durham's Racial Equity Action Planning Team, right? This team is made up of representatives from our 24 departments. And so I asked because it was our first year, I asked the directors in each department to nominate a diverse group of people that would work on the City of Durham's first Racial Equity Action Plan. And that's our plan to operationalize equity. We have spent a year in a GARE cohort. GARE is Government Alliance on Race and Equity, learning about racial equity, learning what it means to apply a racial equity lens, learning what it means to develop an equity action plan for the City of Durham. We are close to the end of the journey for the first year, and all that action plan will do is lay out the work going forward based on what we've seen of the organization and where we think there's work to be done. Next slide, please. And if you'll hit enter twice, it's also important to have a vision and mission to guide the work. Our vision: Durham is a vibrant community in which all residents and employees thrive with power and purpose. Racial equity is an embedded principle. Shared economic prosperity is a reality, and race is not a predictor of outcomes. That's a vision. You may never achieve that vision, but it's important to know what you're working towards, what's important to you, and that's what's important to us. Mission: the City of Durham intentionally identifies racial inequities, engages the community, and uses a collaborative approach in creating solutions to ensure race no longer stands as a determinant of outcomes and opportunities. The mission is your right now work. This is what you could be doing today, and for us, that's what it is. So our work right now is about identifying racial inequities. It's about community engagement, and it's about utilizing a collaborative approach, us and the community we serve, to ensure race doesn't stand as a determinant of outcomes and opportunities. Next slide, please. So normalizing, what is that about? Normalizing is about creating shared understanding. One of the most important things to understand is the language around equity. This slide says it very well. There's diversity, inclusion, and equity. Diversity is about quantity, different identities, different cultures, and all of the other variables, the ones you see and the ones you can't, that define the makeup of our workforce. Inclusion is about quality. It's about participation across identities and cultures. Who's at the table? It's making room for them, inviting them, and including them in the processes. But equity is about justice. Equity is about policies, practices, and procedures to ensure equitable outcomes. Diversity and inclusion is focused on changing hearts and minds. Equity and inclusion is focused on increasing inclusion through systemic change. All of that is important. But the work of equity and inclusion is at the institutional and structural level. The work of diversity and inclusion is at the individual level. So it all is important, but when we talk about Equity, we're talking about institutional and structural change. Next slide, please. And you're going to hit it 3 more times. Okay. And we just got a comment about defining and understanding the difference between diversity, inclusion, and I think equity are critically important, and I so agree. That's why this slide says you need to define the terms. We keep talking about racial equity, and you may have already started that conversation, but you really need to be understanding of what it is and what it isn't. Institutional racism factors into that, structural racism, people of color. You heard me using that term. Some are using BIPOC now, Black and Indigenous people of color. Implicit bias, disproportionality. What do all of these terms mean? Because they factor into racial equity work. And so if you're beginning a journey.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by.
Alana, thank you. All right, when you're beginning a racial equity journey, it is essential that you define all of those terms. What are they, right? And all of them are very important to racial equity work. I said racial equity work is at the institutional and structural level, right? People of color, why are we leading with race in Durham? We don't simply call it equity work, we call it racial equity work. We are intentionally leading with race because race is an indicator of success across all of the dimensions that we talked about before. What's implicit bias and how does that figure into this and how is it affecting equity and equitable outcomes and what is disproportionality? I won't define all of those things for you today. What I'll say instead is that you need to be defining those things for your jurisdiction. So if you're talking about an equity journey and you haven't defined the terms, these are some of the terms. Make sure you have a clear understanding of what they are, but also ensure that that understanding happens for the rest of your organization. We are just at the point where we are starting to bring the rest of our organization into the discussion, where we're sharing vision and mission and the language of equity, and then getting their input and revising it based on what we hear from the employees that are part of this organization and also from the community. So they also need to be brought into the discussion. Next slide, please. 2 more. So take inventory. Take inventory means do an inventory of what's already happening in your organization. And I suspect that there are some things that your organization either has done or are doing that's done with equity. It's never been caught. So the notion of looking at it with an equity lens is different, but some organizations have been doing work for a long time. I wasn't here when it happened, but the city of Durham had I was here when that happened, but we had a living wage initiative, and that was about a year ago, where we wanted to go to, as a city, a minimum wage of, I believe it was $15 an hour for all employees. Why is a living wage initiative an equity-focused item? So why would I say living wage initiative is equity-focused? Reply in the chat, please. All right, they're a little shy. So let me give you some primers. If you look at, so race is a predictor of wage earnings, indeed. So thank you, that was from Corey in Chapel Hill. If you look at data, and equity work encourages you to focus on data. The majority of people at hourly wages are BIPOC. That was from Melissa Alford. Thank you, Melissa. That's Black and Indigenous people of color, right? So if you look at wages in your jurisdiction and you look at the lower paid people, whether it's the part-timers or the people in some of your operations units or wherever they exist who are lower paid. And if you look at that data, and if the majority of them were people of color and they were making less than minimum wage, if you bring them up to minimum wage, have you impacted everybody? And the answer to that would be yes. We focus on them first because we know that more of them are in those lower wage jobs. And by bringing them up, we're bringing everybody else up as well. Something else that the city of Durham did that I forgot to include here was ban the box. Give me a reply in the chat if your jurisdiction has banned the box. And if you don't know what that is, just say not sure. Okay, so good. I got some yeses and some not sure. Ban the box is where we removed the box that said you have to check this box if you are a felon. Now, why is that important to racial equity? So why is that something that we would say represents an equity-focused item? And it certainly was for the city of Durham. But why? Okay, so Aaron has said it leads to bias in hiring practices. Indeed, it does. But we said at the outset, if you look at the criminal justice system in North Carolina, what you'll see is that people of color are disproportionately represented, right, relative to the number of people of color that live in North Carolina. So if they're disproportionately represented, then a higher number of them would be checking that box, which means that they are barred from having a job in your jurisdiction. Ban the box means that box is no longer there. And Anita pointed out that Black and Indigenous people of color often get harsher sentences for the same offenses. And so for whatever reason that a disproportionate number are incarcerated, they are. And if you have to check that box because you are a felon, then you're not going to be able to apply for a job in city government. The city of Durham banned the box in 1990. Second chance hiring of justice involved. And that is ban the box, but we've gone even further. We have a current initiative that's underway where we are looking at people before they come out of the penal system and talking about what we can do to support their re-entry into society at multiple levels. Something we are very proud of. We had an amnesty day for traffic offenses. Amnesty Day for traffic offenses meant looking at people that had outstanding traffic offenses. If you have an outstanding traffic offense, you're not going to be driving, or you're not supposed to be. That means that you can't drive to childcare, you can't drive to your job, you're not supposed to be driving to go shopping, and all of the other things that are basic necessities of life. When we looked at that, we saw that a disproportionate number of people of color were impacted by traffic tickets. And a lot of times this was you had one traffic ticket, you couldn't pay for that traffic ticket, or you didn't show up for court. So a fine or a fee was loaded on top of that. And then another one on top of that. So every time that you couldn't pay, that number may have gotten bigger and bigger. Amnesty Day involved our part of government connecting with other parts of government. So we're Durham City, there's also Durham County, and there's the court system, and coordinating something that allowed people's traffic offenses to be expunged if they were under a certain dollar amount. And I believe it was $500, but I'm not sure. Congresswoman Freeman, if you have that information, you're welcome to come off and add something to that. But it was an amnesty day. And so there was a tremendous number of people, especially people of color, but everybody that were impacted by the amnesty day. So while we looked at people of color first, it didn't just improve life for them, it improved life for all of the people, but we started with them because they were most impacted. We've also done participatory budgeting. And participatory budgeting, when done with an equity lens, looks at Who are the people that wouldn't normally come to discussions about the budget? And how do we get them at the table? Now let's do this with an equity lens together. If you've got participatory budgeting where you're inviting the community to participate in the budgeting process with some funds that will be set aside for their benefit, what do you need to do to get community people to the table? In the chat, please.
I will add, while everyone's writing in the chat, that it's been important to note that it's a process. And so even though we may not get the exact results we want initially, we continue to evolve and develop based on feedback. And so I encourage folks to fail forward as much as possible in this work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Congresswoman Freeman. Some good stuff in the chat, right? Meet them where they are. Meet them where they are. When you think about people that you might want to have at that meeting who don't normally participate, you have to think about things like, when do they get off from work? And if they get off from work at 5, they can't necessarily be at a meeting at 6. And so perhaps that meeting is not going to be on a weekday night. Perhaps that meeting needs to be on a Saturday, or perhaps that meeting needs to be on a Sunday. What about transportation? If I'm accustomed to just doing something that people could drive to, what if I did something that people could take a bus to? So I made sure that it was on a bus line. What about childcare, right? Some people may need childcare, right? I need to know what their needs are, but to find that out, I have to what? Ask them. So when we're talking about participatory budgeting, we need to ask the community what they need and then give them what they need. They told us that food was important and childcare were important. So when we talked about participatory budgeting, we included those things because we believe that that would bring more people to the table. And we currently have a fines and fees initiative. Why is that important? And what is that we're looking at? Well, government has fines and it has fees. An easy one, and one that we are looking at, is the fee associated with water service. So our city does have water service that we provide for residents. That comes with fees, right? If your service gets turned off. So if you think about it, something caused my service to be turned off, the fact that I couldn't pay, and to get my service turned back on, I have to pay that bill, plus I have to pay a fee on top of that bill. Who's disproportionately impacted or impacted the most? People of color. And how do we know that? We know that because data tells a story. So in the city of Durham, we can tell you the zip codes where water is turned off most often, which means we can tell you the zip codes where people are having their service turned back on and having to pay that fee and what that fee amounts to. And so we're doing some looking at that now and saying, is there more that we can do? Because right now we offer support services, whether it's extending your bill out over a longer period of time or consultations, any number of things to help you. But does that fine or fee really need to be there? Are we collecting it and does it need to be there, or is it disproportionately impacting people of color? And this is something that we could do something about that would end up benefiting everyone. Next slide, please. So taking inventory is important. Before we go to this slide, in the chat, can you think of anything that is being done in your jurisdiction? Elena, can you go back to the previous slide? Anything that's being done in your jurisdiction that you think has a racial equity lens attached to it? These are things that we've done or that we're doing in Durham. But what about in your jurisdiction? Okay, so from Diana Kin, Living Wage. Don't be shy. I know more is being done. We just haven't called it racial equity work, but it is. In Hillsborough, sustainability planning. Yes. from Rosehill Organizational Assessment. Contracting with minority and women-owned businesses. Putting printed info translated in food boxes and coronavirus testing sites. Yes. So you're doing a lot. Mark, you're off mute. Did you want to say something? Okay. All right. More from Heidi Carter is funding learning centers where students can go. It's advertising in newspapers that target Black and Indigenous people of color. Yes. So the words are new, but the things that we have been doing as government are not. Is there more that we can do? Yes. Right? So adopting a racial equity agenda says there's more that we can do, and let's find out what that is and focus our energies. Thank you so much for the chat. This is wonderful in terms of what's coming in. Please take a moment to browse through that, because these are wonderful things that are going on, and they're going on already. So government is playing a role. Next slide, please. So we talked about the importance of advancing a racial equity agenda and making it a strategic priority. I told you that the work of my team is focused on building a racial equity plan. What is that? It's a plan to drive institutional and structural change to achieve a collective vision of racial equity. It's a structure to achieve meaningful and measurable results, inclusive of timelines, accountability, and performance measures. So it's a plan to drive change, and it's a structure so that we can measure our results based on timelines, accountability, and how well we perform. It's also a process to equip staff with training, knowledge, and tools to integrate equity into their work and the organization as a whole. Next, please. One of the things that's important to racial equity work is adopting tools to guide equitable decision-making. Racial equity tools integrate explicit consideration of racial equity in decisions. That's policy decisions, practices, programs, and budgets to lead to the development of strategies and actions that reduce racial inequities and improve success for everyone. So adopting a racial equity tool or a racial equity decision-making model is essential to the work of racial equity. Next, please. So let's walk through a sample of what I'm going to call a racial equity tool. Box number 1. What is being considered? What are the desired results and outcomes? What is it that you want to do? What is it that you're thinking of doing? And we're going to apply this model in just a little bit and see if we can make it work or show you how it works. So what is being considered means, what are you proposing? What are you considering doing? What is it that you want to achieve? So what's the desired result and what are the outcomes that you're looking for? With racial equity work, we talk about data a lot. So what is the data? And what does the data tell us? Data should inform decision-making when you're talking about racial equity work, because as I said, we lead with race. So you want to know who is most impacted. Community engagement. With racial equity work, we talk a lot about the community. If you think about government, who do we serve? We absolutely exist to serve the community. So community engagement is essential. For us, many times that takes the form of, surveys. But imagine if we moved from simply, surveys or sessions where we are informing. Imagine if we moved from simply informing the community to consulting or collaborating with the community and what that would look like and whether or not that strengthens some of the decisions that we are making on behalf of the community. A sample racial equity tool includes consideration of item number 4, benefit and burden, unintended consequences, and strategies to mitigate harm. Here's what that means. If I do whatever this thing is that I'm considering, who will benefit? And who will be burdened? Right? And are there any unintended consequences that I can foresee? In other words, is there something that could happen, whatever that is? So this is out of the box thinking. What could possibly happen that I didn't think of, but that would end up harming some other people in our community? And so what are some strategies that I could use to mitigate harm? And number 5 says implementation and accountability. So your racial equity tool includes, how am I going to implement this, and how are we going to hold ourselves accountable, not just internally, but also externally to the community. That is a rough sample of what we mean by a racial equity tool, and you will hear that a lot in racial equity work. Deborah says, community engagement goes beyond the public hearings used by governments. It absolutely does. Community engagement for us recently has taken all kinds of forums. Our Neighborhood Improvement Services Department recently did a Zoom-focused conversation with the Latino community. They had over 800 plus that showed up, and I think more than 1,000 now have looked at the YouTube recording of the conversation. So I think they're almost at 2,000 plus people that they've engaged using a format that heretofore we didn't think of using, right? So community engagement goes beyond what it is we think of as engagement. Neighborhood Improvement Services, Dania says community engagement is a continuous process. However, we have to build the muscle memory. Yes. So it doesn't just stop, it is continuous, and it involves out-of-the-box thinking about what that's going to mean. What's important here is, how do we hear the voice of the community? How do we hear what the community has to say about what it is that we are aiming to do? And sometimes that's not direct. It could be indirect. It could be working through a partner, meaning a community-based organization that already has the voice of the community that you're trying to reach. We need to think historically about who the community is and was. And that's from Sally Green. Elena, can you read the rest of Sally Green's message? It cut off here.
Yep, it says, we need to think historically about who the community is and was. Historically, it was the marginalized communities. Today, not necessarily. Today, in public meetings, for one, the community is whoever shows up, often those with time and resources.
Yes. Everybody understand where we're going here? So when we talk about engagement, we're talking about those that might not have the time or the resources or the wherewithal that's going to get them to the table. And equity work says, what can we do to support that process so that we hear their voice as well? Okay, next slide, please. So what we're going to be doing for the next 20 minutes is using a mini racial equity tool to analyze responses to COVID-19. And I thought COVID-19 because I think this is something that we've all dealt with, right? So I'm going to be asking you to input stuff in the chat as we think through some scenarios. Next slide, please. All right, so this is about applying a mini racial equity tool. So mini means I took the stuff that I told you about the last tool and I kind of condensed it. So we're going to start with what is proposed or recommended. What is the desired result or outcome? What does the data say? Who will benefit or be burdened? What are unintended consequences? And what can be done to mitigate harm? And we're going to do it around some different scenarios. And I think many of which you have seen in your own jurisdictions. I'm going to start with the one on the bottom right. Public swimming pools. In our community, as in many others, a decision was made to close public swimming pools. So not private ones. I live in an area where we have our own swimming pool, and so that was open. So private ones were still open, but all of the public swimming pools were closed. So what is the proposed recommendation? To close public swimming pools. What is the desired result or outcome? Well, desired result, we wanted to prevent the spread of COVID-19 because so much was unknown about that. And the outcome that we want is a lower incidence of COVID-19 in our community. When you move to what does the data say, what's the question I'm asking here? What data do you think I could look at that's going to inform decisions about public swimming pools? Well, the data that I want to look at is who uses public pools, right? And so I see in the box that someone says that their community didn't necessarily have that much data. Understood. There are many communities that don't. Racial equity work shows you some data that you can start to gather that you may not have had heretofore, but it will also point you in the direction of using other sources to gather data. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But what does the data say? What's the data? Well, the data could be any information we have on public pool utilization during the summer. If we don't have that, the data could be where are the pools located? So what communities are they located in? Because generally, the people in that community are the ones who are using those public pools. Right? So if we don't have age data or racial data, we have community data. And so we can infer some things based on the communities where the public pools are situated around who's using those pools. Who will benefit and who will be burdened? So who will benefit? Well, you could say the city in some ways because hopefully, or the community, because we would be reducing, we hope, the spread of COVID-19, which we don't understand. And you look at who would be burdened. So there are students that have lifeguard jobs and other summer jobs that are at the pool for the summer. There's certainly the people that would utilize the public swimming pools, particularly children. And can you be more specific about that is what we would be encouraged to do. Can we be more specific about the burden and what that community looks like? So that goes back to the data. What are the unintended consequences? Well, this is where you start to think outside of the box. So when you say, what are the unintended consequences? Well, if there's not a swimming pool, kids tend to turn on fire hydrants. And if they turn on fire hydrants, they tend to play in the street. And if they're playing in the street, they run the risk of being hit by a car. That is an example of what it means to look at potential unintended consequences. We never intended that to happen, but it could. The next statement 6 there, or question 6, is the most important. What can be done to mitigate harm? So I started you with a proposal to close all of the public pools. The desired result or outcome is to protect the community. The data says that the pools are primarily located in communities of color, and that's who utilizes them the most. So that's who would also be burdened. What are unintended consequences, potential harm to children? My question to you is what can be done to mitigate harm? What I'm inviting you to do is out of the box thinking around this scenario. So if this is what you're facing and you know what the proposal is and you've gone through all of these steps, what can be done to mitigate the harm that's associated with closing all of the public swimming pools? Your response in chat? Out of the box thinking. Elena, can you read some of those as they come in?
Yep. Limit number of people allowed in the pool area, alter the schedule and capacity. Develop other outdoor activities for kids and families, like walking sessions.
Keep going out of the box. So nothing you would normally think of. Be as broad thinking as you can.
Offer other opportunities that allow for social distancing, like group exercise. Set up sprinklers for kids in the communities. Give out small blow-up pools for little ones. Initiate monitored water hydrant use. Reach out to community members and see what they would need in the pool's place. Pop-up water parks.
Fantastic ideas. So fantastic set of ideas. And in one of our communities in North Carolina, they did the equivalent of pop-up water parks. They had their fire trucks show up at locations that were broadcasted in advance on certain days of the week. Children could come. They had them in lines, socially distanced, and so you made an appointment, and I think children had 20 minutes underneath the sprinkler that came from the water truck. And that actually happened in one of our North Carolina jurisdictions, right? So when it comes to applying a racial equity tool and what can be done to mitigate harm, you have to go way outside of the box and say, it doesn't look like coloring in the lines. It looks like the kinds of things that you came up with, that you put in chat, that are not traditional thinking, but that are really good ideas that could be done to mitigate harm to people who don't have other alternatives, right? That's an example of how we apply this mini racial equity tool. I'm gonna have us do that around some other scenarios as time permits, but I wanna stop now and ask if you have any questions. And you'll have to unmute yourself if you have a question, so feel free to come off and unmute yourself. And I'm seeing some great ideas, and the jurisdiction, by the way, was Greensboro. And I see another great idea, repurposing outdoor landscaping, watering of public property for socially distant water pleasures. Yeah, I'm there. That's
Ms.
another
Williams. Ms. Williams. Hello.
Yes.
This is Mark Wilson. I have a question when you go back to the wage that we were on. Are there a disparity between African-American men and African-American women doing the same job?
Doing the same, say that again?
African-American men and women performing the same job per functions. Are there a difference in wages?
Yeah, there are differences in wages. I don't have that specific data right now, but if you looked at women of color and men of color, you may see the differences, but you probably also see both of them at the lower end of the scale with regard to what wages are.
Okay, I guess what I was asking, do African-American men make more than African-American women?
I don't have that data, so I can't respond directly to that question. If there's somebody else on the call that can, I'm happy to have them jump in and respond to that, but I don't have that data, so I don't want to suppose it. And I don't have time to Google it right now because we're in presentation mode. See Civilities and Civil Rights, Greensboro, North Carolina, and the Black Struggle for Freedom. Thank you, Sally. Any other questions or comments? And you can put it in the chat or come off mic and do your question. All right, give me a thumbs up. So you have a reactions button. Give me a thumbs up if you understand this model, because the next couple of minutes we're going to use to apply this model. And so I want to have you answering in chat, but I want to make sure that you're clear. So if you go over to your reactions button, and you can do a thumbs up. So if you understand this and you're pretty clear how to work through it, give me a thumbs up. All right, I can't see everybody, so I can't see your view, Alana. Are people able to respond?
Yep, there's a lot of thumbs.
Good. Okay. All right, so let's now work through this model around some other scenarios. Let's talk about City Hall access. I'm not sure what happened in your community, but one of the things that we did early on, we didn't understand this virus or how it worked to protect our employees and the public, was to close City Hall. So we closed down City Hall and we did not have City Hall access. So the proposal, close City Hall until we have a better understanding for what this is. What's the desired result and outcome? Protect the community. What does the data say? Well, I'll tell you some of the data that we looked at. And the data is with regard to what do residents use City Hall for? Because City Hall belongs to the people that are part of our community. So what does the data say? That we have people that are unbanked and they use City Hall to pay their water bill. So now, who will benefit and be burdened? Well, if you look at potential benefit is to the people that worked in City Hall who, because of the uncertainty, may feel a little bit nervous about doing business with the public, but who would be burdened? Some of our residents could be, because their access to City Hall would be blocked. What are the unintended consequences? Well, if you can't come to City Hall to pay your water bill and you don't pay your water bill, there's a possibility that your service is going to be disconnected. What can be done to mitigate harm? This is your scenario. It's your jurisdiction. What can be done to mitigate harm? So in the chat, please. Okay, curbside service. Set up a secure drop box, create a drive-up window, defer payments, set up tables, specific hours. Yes, keep them coming. Alana, could you read some of those, please? They are very good. Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Drive-through windows, have customer service hours on specific days, delay cutting off water and allocate fund assistance, pop-up payment tents.
They're excellent. So thank you for doing that. And it's an example of your jurisdictions having a racial equity lens. I even saw deferred payments in there. And that's one of the steps that we took in the city of Durham. We did deferred payments. I think we did a deferral period of about 3 months. And there are a few more in there. Alana, would you read those as well?
Yep. Contact people who have used service in the past year and ask for convenient alternatives, and quick process to screen for symptoms.
So the answer is not here. It's out here somewhere. And when you start using an equity lens, it focuses you on what those answers might be. And somebody did put a response mark in the chat to your question. So what we're looking for with an equity lens is, where is it? Where's the out there? What else could we do that will mitigate harm and support our community? I hope everybody is understanding this. I think we have time to walk through one more scenario, maybe 1.5, but one for sure. So let's think about public transportation. So what is the proposed recommendation? So the proposed recommendation was to either shut down service or minimize service on some of the bus routes, right? Not that many people were riding the bus anyway, and there were concerns because you get in through the front door and the driver is at the front door and he's concerned, the community members are concerned, just a number of things. And there were other things coming up in other communities where, people weren't social distancing when they would board buses. So just a number of concerns, including with the air quality on the bus. So what is the desired result or outcome? Again, protect the community. We want to keep you as safe as possible. And so we want to reduce or minimize the number of COVID-19 cases in our area. What does the data say about who rides those buses? Well, we do have data. And the data says that primarily it's people of color. And many people who work at hospitals. So didn't anticipate that, but many of the people who work at hospitals didn't necessarily drive to the hospital and park there because there was a fee associated with that. So what they would do is board the bus, which would take them there. So who will benefit and who will be burdened? Well, the benefit would be the drivers and the public in general, because potentially you would be safer. But who would be burdened? Well, the people who need that transport to go to work. When you think about who the essential workers were, right? Your data should look at who are considered essential workers. Generally, essential workers are who? People that are at the bottom of the economic ladder. So generally, these are the people in the lowest paying jobs that need that bus transportation. What are the unintended consequences? They'll lose their jobs. You can't get to work, so you're going to lose your job. That is a big potential unintended consequence. In this scenario, what can be done to mitigate harm? So out of the box thinking, whether it happened in your jurisdiction or not, what can we do where bus transportation or public transportation is concerned to mitigate harm? Your ideas in the chat, please. And Elena, would you read some of those as they come up?
Yep. People enter bus through side door, enter from rear only, provide masks, and provide additional protection. Hand out free masks to all riders. Waive parking at the parking fee at the hospital. Free bus pass, no collection of fees. Plexiglass surrounds the driver. One-way travel, block-offs and seats. Provide sanitizer to everyone. Increase the number of routes. Reduce the number of riders. Identify and provide alternative transportation recommendations, such as partnering with Lyft or Uber. Over-communicate, and think about those communication mechanisms.
Thank you so much, Elena. That was fantastic. You are already thinking about racial equity and the equity implications of decisions that you're making. Applying a mini racial equity tool just reinforces that behavior. And so the reason that Gare says use one, the reason that we use one, is because it makes us think about equity in our decision-making. And the kinds of things you're coming up with say that the ideas, again, are here. They're not just here and limited, but they're here. And when we use an equity lens and we start to think about those things, we are able to get to those things that would mitigate harm very easily. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your participation. This is our why racial equity is important to us. We believe a focus on racial equity will support improved outcomes for all. That's what we believe as a city. That's what we believe. And we believe it every step of the way. That's what you'll see on our city council. Our city council holds our departments accountable for equity considerations. Have you looked at equity? Has that factored into your decision-making? The leadership in our organization is holding people accountable for integrating an equity lens, because we believe focusing on that will support improved outcomes for all. That is our why in the city of Durham. Next slide, please. So you can just go through this. These are foundations of equity. This is what we have talked about today. So it's just a summary of the things that we have talked about and that we have talked through. Next slide, please. Are there any questions that you would like to come off mic and ask, or that you would like to put in the chat that I can address today? All right, I'm going to guess that that's a no. Next slide, please. The question is, will you share slides? I am happy to share them. They will be a little bit out of context because I think the real organization to share them, if you're interested in this road to equity, is GARE. GARE is Government Alliance on Race and Equity, and they really informed us a lot around equity. They've also informed many other jurisdictions, some of which I see on the call today. So when you talk about racial equity in North Carolina, the organizations that I can think of off the top of my head that are a member of GARE include Asheville, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, Greensboro, Carrboro, Chapel Hill, Orange County, Hillsborough, Wake County, Raleigh, and those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. TJ Cog is also a member of GARE. Thank you, Lindsay. Yes, so that's where we're getting our information, our insights about racial equity. And GARE is nothing more than a membership organization, but it's a membership organization that linked us all together. Without GARE, I wouldn't know these people. So without GARE, I couldn't pick up a phone and say, this is what I'm thinking about. What are you doing? What are your thoughts? And how do we advance equity? And so they are helping us to do that because we're networked, right? So that's what GARE does. It's helped us to form this network of communities that are supporting each other. We are all on this road together. So we are learning together. We are moving this forward together. We don't have right answers, but we'll tell you what's been learned from the experience of others, because GARE has more than 300 member jurisdictions now around the United States. Lindsay Jones says GARE has been a very positive network for the city of Raleigh. Yeah, and so Raleigh is another one if I didn't include them. So we are all in this together, and GARE has networked us together. So I'm very appreciative of that. Next slide, please.
So you do, sorry, Sharon, you just have one question from Hannah. What are ways we can encourage our local governments to think outside of the box for solutions?
I think one of the things that you can do, even without additional context, is beginning to take that idea of a little racial equity model and asking some of those questions. In other words, what if you just started to insert, if this is what we were trying to do, who would benefit and who would be burdened by that? Or are there any unintended consequences if we do thus and such? That's the beginning of the thinking that oh, there might be something else here that I'm not seeing. So starting to insert small things into the conversation is a beginning. I see another question in there about allyship.
Yep, the question is, do you have any recommendations for encouraging allyship from non-BIPOC members of the community?
So yes, allyship is about becoming part of and working in cohort with people that are different from you. And so I've gotten this question from my friends. And so what I've told them is what's important to me in allyship is that they are on this same journey, that they are learning along with me. So don't ask me simply about racial equity. Go on the same journey, learn, and then let's engage in a dialogue. So don't just make it about me telling you. Make it about your own learning journey. If you haven't seen it already, there are many 21-day racial equity learning journeys that are out there. So if you Google 21-day racial equity learning, something will come up. Take a look at that and see what you can do in there to increase your learning and your knowledge, and it will increase your ability to be an effective ally. Other questions?
Ms. Williams, Don Raines. A lot of our prior summits have been dealing with affordable housing, whether it's individual ownership or multifamily housing. But the equity formula and the models that you presented are excellent questions that we need to present when we're planning affordable housing.
And you're saying, Don, is it a model that you could use?
Yes.
I believe so. It has application in many, many places. I would like to see what you're doing, but it's one of those things that I would say contact GARE, because now that TJ Cog is a member, you can ask those kinds of questions of GARE, who have been doing this work much longer than I have, but they'll be able to inform how other jurisdictions are using it to inform their decision-making around housing. And I think that really would give you some specifics that you could use going forward. Elaine, I think we have time for one or two more questions if you have any.
If there's one. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I have one. Yeah, I have one.
Steve?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. Well, mine's just a comment. I really appreciate it. I did a lot of listening and note-taking, and I want to thank Alina and everybody and Don for putting this together, along with Councilmember Freeman. She's a friend of mine. My comment is, looking at it from Morrisville's perspective, our demographics has changed so much in the last 10 years. Today, 45 to 50% of our community is, Indian or Asian. And so with that comes a whole different set of, not challenges, but my colleague, Councilmember Garamella, knows it more than me. I mean, this is the first time in probably the history of our county where a sitting council member worked to provide census updates in 3 different languages, Hindi, Telugu, and one other language, for that community so that they could participate in the census. Oftentimes that community they don't know how to interact with cops. So in that culture, when a police officer is talking to you, which normally we all feel the same way, it's not a good thing. So there's like a fear of, so how do you build those bridges? So Chief Andrews is working a lot with me and him, Councilmember Garamella and myself, to make sure that we're reaching out to that increasingly changing demographic in Morrisville. So I think as cities and towns are developing equity and inclusion plans, we have to also be amenable to many cultural differences, as people were not born and brought up here. So, even in India, like one thing I learned as the longest serving Indian in Morrisville is, we can't shake hands anymore because of COVID, but if someone says, I'm coming for P&Z, and you shake their hand and you're the mayor, they think that it's a done deal, because in that culture, when a mayor shakes your hand, it's a commitment, right? So there's a lot of communication challenges that occur that have to be translated to staff. And I just wanted to throw that out there as a perspective that I could bring, so.
Excellent perspective. And it is important that we train staff. And so we are going to be doing the same thing with ours as we evolve. And those differences that you talked about are essential to understand and to integrate into your culture. So that understanding is important.
Thank you so much.
Can I make one statement, please?
Yes, please. And then we're going to wrap up because we're right at time.
This is Mark Wilson. I just want to make a statement in that we must be able to separate out Black Lives Matter from those who are neo-Nazis, white supremacists. As it appears on our television, everybody is mixed in. And Black Lives Matter is an important thing for justice among the Black community. And we must separate them out from those who burn buildings, because I don't think that's their intent. I don't think that's the intent of Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. This was a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate your participation. And thank you, TJ for having this forum and realizing it's still important, even in the midst of, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank two people. My director, Deborah Giles, is on here, but also Councilwoman Deidreana Freeman. I told you at the city council level in our city, they believe in this journey that we're on, and I couldn't be more grateful for your support. And thank you to the credit union. So appreciative of this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I just want to say a huge thank you to Sharon. She did an amazing job and she's been a great partner to work with for this workshop. So a few closing remarks, just as I've still got everyone. So the format for the summit is a little different. Obviously, it's virtual. We have 4 more sessions that we are going to be doing. So the purpose of today's session was to provide you with the foundation and some tools to assess different topics, obviously, as Sharon talked about. And so we have 4 more sessions that we hope you'll bring this lens to. Use your tools that you've learned today. There's going to be sessions on growth, equitable growth, community engagement, which I know was discussed many times today, policing, and community livability, so public health, health equity. So those are 4 more sessions, and we will have some presenters talking about examples, because it's always great to see examples. It's always helpful. And then there will be time to talk and share and think about each of those 4 areas. So I encourage everyone to join. And we will be sending out all of the recording and presentation from today as well. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. You also.
Thank you.
Thank you.